I don't remember the exact year anymore. It must have been somewhere around 1978, maybe 1979. Back then, I was young, strong, and foolish enough to believe that fear was something only old people talked about. I worked as a boatman on the Blackwater River in southern Louisiana. Most days, I carried fishermen, farm workers, and travelers from one side of the river to the other. It was honest work. The river fed me, but it also taught me something I never forgot. Some waters are not meant to be crossed after dark. One afternoon, I was sitting near the old wooden dock with my friend Caleb. The sun was still high, and the air smelled of mud, wet rope, and diesel from the fishing boats nearby. That was when a man I knew came running toward us. His name was Harris. He looked nervous, like he had been carrying bad news for too long. "Eli," he said, lowering his voice, "can you do someone a kindness?" I laughed and said, "Depends on what kind of kindness." He looked over his shoulder, then back at me. "There's a body at St. Mary's Hospital, poor family. They need it taken upriver to a settlement near Bell Parish. They don't have money for a proper hearse. Roads are washed out from last week's flood. The only way is by water." The moment he said, "body," Caleb stopped smiling. I should have said no. Any normal man would have said no. But we were young, and there was something about helping a poor family bury their dead that felt like a duty. Harris told us they could pay only a little, but enough to cover food and kerosene for the lantern. Caleb looked at me and said, "We can do it." And because he said it first, I couldn't bring myself to refuse. There were supposed to be 3 of us that night, me, Caleb, and another dockhand named Roy. But when we returned to the dock before sunset, Roy was nowhere to be found. Later we learned his mother had locked him inside the house and refused to let him go. At the time, we cursed him for being a coward. Now, I think his mother saved his life. Caleb and I went to the hospital just as the evening sky began turning orange. The corpse was already wrapped in a clean white sheet and tied carefully with rope. The dead man's face was covered. We were told he had died suddenly, far from home, and his people wanted him buried before the next evening. A relative was supposed to travel with us. A thin man in a brown coat handed me a folded $100 bill and said, "You two go ahead. I have one last paper to sign. I'll meet you at Carter's Landing. Stop there and wait for me." I asked, "You sure?" He nodded quickly. "I'll be there. Don't worry." That was the last time we saw him that night. We loaded the wrapped body into the middle of the boat. I lit the hurricane lantern and hung it from a nail near the bow. The flame shook in the wind, making the white sheet glow like something alive. By the time we pushed off from the dock, the sun had disappeared. The river was calm at first. Too calm. For the first couple of hours, Caleb and I rowed in silence. The only sounds were the dip of the oars, the creak of the wooden boat, and the slow slap of black water against the sides. When we reached Carter's Landing, nobody was there. No lantern, no voice, no man in a brown coat. We waited nearly half an hour, growing angrier with every minute. Caleb spat into the river and said, "We should turn around." I wanted to. God knows I wanted to. But an old fisherman sitting near the landing heard our argument and came over. He had a pipe in his mouth and eyes that looked like they had seen too much river in one lifetime. "What's the trouble?" he asked. I told him. The old man listened, then looked at the covered body in our boat. Finally, he said, "Boys, thieves don't stop a corpse boat. Not even bad men want that kind of luck. Take him where he belongs." Then he leaned closer. "But don't hug the bank tonight, stay in the middle of the river." I asked him why. He didn't answer. He only said, "Some things wait near the trees." We should have listened. We pushed off again. By then, the world had turned completely black. There were no house lights anymore, no road sounds, no voices from shore, just the endless dark water and the wall of cypress trees on both sides. The lantern flickered weakly. The corpse lay between us. Caleb tried to make conversation, but his voice sounded wrong in that darkness. Too small, too human. We were supposed to pass through a narrow channel called Blackwater Creek, then follow the bend toward Bell Parish. I had never taken that route at night, but I knew enough about rivers to trust my sense of direction. Or at least, I thought I did. After some time, I realized the current felt wrong. The trees looked too close. The bends in the creek did not match the directions I had been given. "We're off course," I whispered. Caleb looked around and said, "Then turn us back." It took us nearly an hour to find the right channel again. By then, both of us were tired, hungry, and irritated. The night had grown colder. Mist floated over the water like torn cloth. We finally entered Blackwater Creek close to midnight. The creek was narrower than the river. The banks pressed in on us from both sides. Insects screamed from the reeds. Frogs croaked somewhere in the mud. Branches hung low over the water like hands trying to touch the boat. The current was against us, so I made the mistake of steering closer to the bank to make rowing easier. That was when we heard the voice. "Boatman." It came from the left bank. Caleb froze. The voice called again. "Boatman, bring that boat over. I need a ride." It was a man's voice, tired, almost pleading. I lifted the lantern, but the trees were too thick. I could see only shadows, Caleb whispered. "Keep going." The voice called again. "Please, I'm in trouble. Take me just a little farther up." Caleb grabbed my arm. "Don't turn this boat." I remembered the old fisherman's warning. Stay in the middle, some things wait near the trees. But then I thought about the corpse in the boat. I thought about the poor dead man we were carrying. I thought about what the old fisherman had said before that. Thieves don't stop a corpse boat, so I told myself there was nothing to fear. That was the worst mistake of my life. I turned the boat toward the bank. A man stepped out from between the trees. He wore a long, pale coat, the kind old preachers used to wear in rural churches. His beard was thick and gray. His face was mostly hidden in shadow, but his voice was calm. When he saw the body, he said something that should have chilled me right away. "I'll sit beside the dead and pray over him." Neither Caleb nor I had told him we were carrying a corpse. But I was tired to think, I said. "Climb in." The man stepped into the boat so heavily the wood groaned under him. I told him to sit near us. He smiled and said, "Number, I'll sit back here." He sat beside the covered body. Neither of us asked his name. Neither of us asked where he was going. We just started rowing again. A few minutes passed. Then a few more. The man began mumbling behind us. At first, I thought he was praying. His words were low and wet, like someone speaking with a mouth full of water. Caleb was rowing now. I sat down for a moment because my arms were burning. The lantern swayed. The creek whispered. My eyes grew heavy. I don't know how long I slept. Maybe 5 minutes. Maybe 20. I woke when Caleb shook me violently. His face was pale. His lips were trembling. One hand still held the oar, but his eyes were fixed on the back of the boat. He didn't speak. He only pointed. I turned, and in the weak yellow light of the lantern, I saw something no man should ever see. The stranger was bent over the corpse. The white sheet had been ripped open. His hands were deep inside the dead man's chest. At first, my mind refused to understand what I was seeing. Then he lifted something dark and shining to his mouth, and he ate. Caleb made a sound like he was choking. The man's shoulders moved as he chewed slowly, calmly, like an animal feeding in the dark. The insects stopped. I swear to you, the whole swamp went silent. No frogs, no crickets, no wind. Only that wet, tearing sound from the back of the boat. My grandmother used to tell stories about things that lived in the bayou before churches, before roads, before names. She called them flesh walkers. Spirits that wore human faces, things that fed on the dead first, then the living. I had laughed at those stories as a boy. I was not laughing now. The stranger reached into the corpse again. I saw his fingers move under the ribs. I saw blood running over his wrists. Then he turned his head slightly, as if he knew we were watching. I whispered to Caleb, "Get us to shore." He didn't ask which shore. He just rowed. The boat scraped forward through the black water. Every second felt like an hour. I could not look away from the thing in the back of the boat. It kept eating. Piece by piece, softly, patiently. When the bow finally touched mud, the stranger stopped. His neck twisted toward us. That was when the lantern light fell across his face. It was not the face of the man we had picked up. His skin looked burned, blackened and cracked as if he had crawled out of a fire. His eyes were red, not like irritated eyes, but red like hot coals under ash. Blood poured from the corners of his mouth and dripped down into his beard. Then he smiled, not wide, just enough to show teeth that were too long for a human mouth. Caleb screamed. We jumped from the boat and ran. Branches tore at my shirt. Mud swallowed my boots. I could hear Caleb somewhere beside me, breathing hard, praying and cursing at the same time. Behind us, laughter rose from the creek, deep, ragged, hungry. We ran through the swamp without knowing where we were going. We crossed ditches, stumbled over roots, splashed through shallow water, and tore our hands on thorn bushes. The laughter followed. Sometimes it sounded far away. Sometimes it sounded right behind my ear. Then through the trees I saw a faint light, a farmhouse. I almost cried when I saw it. I tried to shout, but before I could make a sound, something grabbed the back of my neck. 5 fingers closed around me like iron. My legs stopped moving. My whole body went numb. I looked back. The thing stood behind me. Its face was inches from mine. It was breathing hard, like it wanted to swallow me whole, but was enjoying my fear first. The last thing I saw was its red eyes. Then the world went black. When I woke, dawn was breaking. I was lying on a wooden floor inside a small farmhouse. My neck burned like someone had pressed hot metal into my skin. Around me stood 6 strangers, all staring as if they couldn't believe I was alive. Caleb was there too. His face was dirty, scratched, and swollen from crying. He grabbed my hand and said, "You're alive, Eli. God help us, you're alive." Later, he told me what happened. When the creature caught me, Caleb ran until he reached the farmhouse. He screamed for help. The family inside knew something was wrong the moment he mentioned Blackwater Creek. They knew about the thing. The old farmer shouted for everyone to release the cattle from the barn. At first, Caleb thought the man had gone mad, but the farmer kept yelling, "Turn them loose. Turn every cow loose." They opened the barn gates. The cattle ran wild into the fields and toward the swamp, bellowing like thunder. The family followed with lanterns, rifles, and dogs. When they found me, I was unconscious in the mud. The creature was gone. The farmer told us, "That thing won't go near cattle, never has." I don't know why. Maybe it was superstition. Maybe there are old rules in this world we no longer understand. But I know this, if those people had not come, I would not be telling this story. After sunrise, the farmers came with us back to the creek. The boat was still there, half stuck in the mud. The corpse was still inside, but it was no longer whole. The eyes were gone. The feet had been chewed down to the bone. The chest had been split open, and the heart was missing. Even the old farmer, who seemed to know more about that creature than any man should, crossed himself and looked away. 2 men from the farm agreed to travel with us the rest of the way. With them in the boat and with daylight over the water, we finally carried the body to Bell Parish. When we reached the dead man's family, the relative who was supposed to meet us at Carter's Landing was already there. Waiting on the porch like nothing had happened. I lost control. I grabbed him by the collar and hit him twice before the others pulled me away. He kept crying and saying he was sorry, that he had missed us, that he found another way by road the next morning. Maybe that was true, maybe it wasn't. I no longer cared. We stayed there that night and left the next morning with our payment. On the way home, we stopped again at the farmhouse whose people had saved us. I thanked them until my voice broke. By the time I returned home, I was no longer the same man. For weeks, I could not sleep. Whenever I closed my eyes, I saw the lantern swinging over that white sheet. I heard the wet sound of chewing. I felt those 5 fingers closing around my neck. My mother noticed I was wasting away. I barely ate. I jumped at every sound after sunset. Finally, I told her everything. She took me to an old preacher outside town. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he placed a hand on my shoulder and said, "Son, you didn't meet a man out there. You met something that wanted to be mistaken for one." He prayed over me, and slowly, very slowly, I began to live again. Caleb recovered better than I did. At least, that's what people thought. But he never worked the river after dark again. Neither did I. Years have passed since that night. Most of the old docks are gone now. The river routes changed. The hospital was rebuilt. People who hear this story usually smile politely and say fear can make young men imagine terrible things. Maybe they're right. Maybe exhaustion, darkness, and a corpse in a boat can twist the mind. But I still have the marks on the back of my neck, 5 dark finger-shaped scars. And every time I hear cattle crying in a field at night, I remember Blackwater Creek. I remember the man in the pale coat. And I remember his smile when he realized we had seen him feeding.